up and your youth has passed. The trade-off is
Welcome
you
to
gain
Girls
the
Gone
middle
Menopause, the
wisdom.
podcast where we talk about the good, the bad, and the extremely sweaty realities of midlife. I'm Adreana.
And I'm Alison. We are two 55-year-old best friends who have known each other since the 7th grade. We've survived puberty, bad 80s perms, marriages, divorces, kids, and career changes together. And now we are navigating the wildest ride of all, menopause.
That's right. Just to give you all a little snapshot of where we are at right now, I'm currently navigating life in a boarder in a rented room, Long Beach, California, trying to figure out my long distance relationships with my partner of 30-something years who recently moved to Sacramento.
And I'm out in the burbs in Los Alamitos, tapping into my background in psychology and sales, doing special needs advocacy, and preparing to become an empty nester as my youngest gets ready to graduate high school. We are both in major transition periods in our lives.
Which is why it is the perfect time to talk about the ultimate biological transition. Today's episode is going to be packed. We've actually broken this single episode down into 4 parts so we can really cover the landscape of menopause. In this first segment, before we hit our first break, we are starting at square one. We are going to look at how science actually defines perimenopause and menopause and what women actually experience when they go through it.
Because if you're anything like us, you probably realized pretty quickly that we were taught absolutely nothing about this. I mean, we get the birds and the bees talk in middle school, and we hear all about puberty and childbirth. But when it comes to the end of our reproductive years, absolute silence. We don't talk about what happens after the birds get with the bees.
Exactly. And there are about 6,000 women in the US reaching menopause every single day. That's 1.3 million women entering menopause annually. Yet there is this persistent stigma and shame surrounding it, which has led to so much misunderstanding. So let's break down the actual definitions. Alison, put your psychology degree to work. What actually is menopause?
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of people use the term menopause loosely to describe this whole decade of midlife changes. But medically speaking, menopause isn't a long, drawn-out phase. It's a single day. Menopause is officially defined as the point when a woman has gone 12 consecutive months without a menstrual period.
Right. Just one day. The day after you hit that 12-month mark, you are technically postmenopausal. And you'll be postmenopausal for the rest of your life, which, given today's life expectancies, could be a third to a half of your entire lifespan.
In the United States, the average age of menopause is 51 or 52 years old. If it happens between 40 and 45, it's considered early menopause. And if it happens before 40, it's called premature menopause. Of course, there are also medical paths to menopause, like having a hysterectomy where the ovaries are removed, or undergoing chemotherapy, which can abruptly throw a woman into menopause.
But for those of us going through natural ovarian aging, the real roller coaster happens in the years leading up to that final period. That phase is called perimenopause. And let me tell you, perimenopause is the tricky part. It usually starts when a woman is in her 40s and can last anywhere from 3 to 7 years, or sometimes even up to 10 years.
So what is actually happening in our bodies during perimenopause? To understand it, we have to look at the ovaries and the brain. As females, we are born with all of our eggs. By the time we start ovulating, we have a certain supply, and that supply naturally depletes over time. By the time a woman is 40, she is down to about 3% of her original egg supply.
I was reading this fascinating breakdown by Dr. Mary Claire Haver, an OB/GYN and menopause specialist. She explains that ovulation actually starts in the brain, not the ovaries. The hypothalamus is like the master regulator in the brain, constantly checking our blood for estrogen levels.
Yes, and when estrogen is low, the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which then sends stimulating hormones, FSH and LH, down to the ovaries to tell them to produce estrogen and release an egg. In a healthy younger woman, this happens like a beautiful, predictable EKG every single month.
But in perimenopause, we reach this critical threshold where we are running out of viable eggs. The ovaries become resistant to those signals from the brain. So the brain senses that estrogen is low, it sends the signal, but the ovaries are struggling to respond.
It's like the brain is yelling at the ovaries. The hypothalamus says, "Where's my estrogen?" And the pituitary starts pumping out higher and higher levels of these stimulating hormones to try and force the ovaries to act.
Exactly. It creates absolute chaos in the brain. Dr. Haver literally called it the zone of chaos. Instead of a steady cycle, a woman's hormones fluctuate wildly and unpredictably. One day, your hormones might look completely normal on a blood test, and the next day, they are totally out of balance. And because the brain hates chaos, the very first signs of perimenopause often aren't irregular periods. They are neurological symptoms like brain fog and mental health changes.
Which brings us to what women actually experience. When you think of menopause, the first thing that comes to mind is hot flashes, right?
The classic vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, and night sweats, about 75 to 80% of women experience them. And they aren't just a quick feeling of being warm. They cause your core body temperature to rise, your heart rate to increase, and result in intense sweating that absolutely drenches your sheets and disrupts your sleep.
And we used to think these only lasted a couple of years. But recent data from a massive study called SWAN, the study of women's health across the nation, showed that the median duration of vasomotor symptoms is actually about 7.5 years. And for women who start having hot flashes while they are still having periods, it can last almost 12 years.
And Alison, as a Black woman, this next statistic really hit home for me. That same study showed that the duration and severity of symptoms vary significantly by race. For Black women, hot flashes last an average of 10.1 years. 10 years of hot flashes. Women of color are also more likely to transition into menopause earlier and experience more severe symptoms overall.
That is staggering. 10 years of disrupted sleep is going to affect everything in your life. But beyond the hot flashes, there is a massive list of other symptoms because, as it turns out, we have estrogen receptors all over our bodies. Estrogen isn't just for making babies. It protects our brains, our hearts, our bones, our joints, and our metabolism.
Let's talk about the brain first. Many women experience severe brain fog, difficulty concentrating, and memory issues. Dr. Pauline Maki, a neuroscientist, noted that about 10 to 11% of women experience a clinically significant decline in their ability to learn and remember words during the menopause transition. We are also learning that menopause is linked to actual changes in the brain's gray matter volume. Postmenopausal women show lower volumes of gray matter in areas involved with memory and emotional regulation. Some women literally feel like they are getting early onset Alzheimer's.
With my psychology background, the mental health aspect is what really stands out to me. During perimenopause, women are 1.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety, and up to 30% experience symptoms severe enough to be considered a depressive disorder. And because our neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine are directly affected by fluctuating estrogen and progesterone, women who have never had mental health issues before might suddenly experience severe mood swings, irritability, or panic attacks.
I think about how many women are probably sitting in their cars or at their desks, just feeling completely unhinged and not understanding why. It's biological. And then there are the physical changes. We lose the protective effects of estrogen on our cardiovascular system, meaning our risk for heart disease sharply increases. Our bone density accelerates its decline, putting us at risk for osteoporosis. A woman can lose up to 20% of her bone density in the first 5 to 7 years post-menopause.
Oh, and let's not forget the changes to our metabolism. Even without changing your diet or exercise routine, the drop in estrogen changes how and where your body stores fat. A premenopausal woman might have about 8% of her body fat stored as visceral fat, that deep belly fat around the organs. After menopause, that can jump to 20 to 23%. It's incredibly frustrating when you're doing all the right things and your body composition just completely shifts against your will.
Plus, the joint pain, the dry and itchy skin, the thinning hair, the heart palpitations. Dr. Haver listed over 50 symptoms ranging from acid reflux and dizzy spells to frozen shoulder and electric shock sensations in the skin. And then there is a whole category of symptoms that nobody wants to talk about, but we are going to talk about it here: GSM, or genitourinary syndrome of menopause.
Yes, GSM. Because the bladder, the urethra, and the vaginal tissues are packed with estrogen and testosterone receptors, the loss of hormones causes that tissue to thin out and lose its elasticity and moisture.
This can lead to severe vaginal dryness, burning, and pain during intercourse. It also alters the microbiome down there, making postmenopausal women highly susceptible to recurrent urinary tract infections, urinary urgency, and incontinence. Up to 50 to 70% of postmenopausal women experience GSM, yet only a tiny fraction, like 6 to 7%, are actually getting medical treatment for it, largely because of embarrassment.
It's tragic because these symptoms don't just go away with time. If left untreated, GSM can actually get progressively worse, and it severely impacts a woman's libido and sexual health, which can obviously take a massive toll on relationships and self-esteem.
So, if millions of women are experiencing these massive full body symptoms, why is it such a mystery? Why are we left to suffer?
Honestly, a huge part of the problem is a persistent knowledge gap in healthcare. We have to remember that our medical system historically focused on women almost exclusively during their reproductive years. Once we are done having babies, we sort of fall off the medical radar.
It's so true. Healthcare providers often fail to connect the dots. A woman might be sent to a psychiatrist for her mood swings, a sleep specialist for her insomnia, and a cardiologist for her palpitations. She gets multiple different treatments when in reality, all of those complaints stem from the exact same underlying hormonal transition.
And we can't completely blame the doctors because they simply aren't being taught this in medical school. A 2023 survey found that over 90% of OBGYN residency program directors agreed their residents needed a standardized menopause curriculum, but less than a third actually offered one. If the specialists, the gynecologists, aren't being adequately trained in menopause care, how can we expect general practitioners to know what to do?
Dr. Haver shared a story that absolutely infuriated me. She was talking about her early days in residency, reviewing a chart for a woman in her 40s who came in with vague complaints: weight gain, headaches, a little depression, and low libido. The senior doctor told her, "You've got a WWU," which stood for whiny woman.
Wow, that is awful.
Right? Other doctors across the country had similar codes for these midlife women, like Total Body Dolor or Madame Dolores. Because the medical system didn't know how to connect the dots of perimenopause, they just assumed it was all in the woman's head. It is the ultimate form of medical gaslighting.
And that gaslighting costs us. It costs us our quality of life, our relationships, and our careers. There's research showing that menopause-related symptoms result in an estimated $150 billion lost globally each year due to productivity losses. Women are missing work, passing up promotions, or even leaving the workforce entirely during their peak earning years because they are struggling with brain fog, sleep deprivation, and hot flashes without any support.
But Alison, that is exactly why we are doing this podcast. The silence is finally breaking. Women are pushing back against the stigma. We are sharing our stories and we are demanding better care. As you always say with your advocacy work, if you want the system to change, you have to advocate for yourself and educate yourself first.
Absolutely. You have to be the CEO of your own health. And knowing what is happening in your body, understanding that it is biological, not psychological, is the first step. You are not going crazy. You are just going through perimenopause.
Amen to that. Menopause is an inevitable life stage, but suffering through it in silence is not.
All right, that wraps up the first segment of today's deep dive. We've laid out the science and the symptoms, but don't worry, we aren't going to leave you hanging with just the bad news.
Definitely not. Stick around because after the break in segment 2, we are going to dive into the solutions. We'll be talking about the gold standard of treatment, hormone replacement therapy. We will discuss the history, the infamous Women's Health Initiative study that scared everyone off estrogen, and what the modern science actually says about the risks and the incredible benefits.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the menopause episode of Girls Gone Menopause. If you are just joining us, I'm Adreana, and sitting across the mic from me is my dear friend of over 40 years, Alison.
Hey everyone. Before the break, we laid out the basic biology of what perimenopause and menopause actually are. We talked about the depletion of our eggs, the hormonal chaos that happens in the brain, and the classic physical symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats. But Adriana, as we prepared for this episode, it became glaringly obvious that the hot flashes are just the tip of the iceberg.
They really are. The truth is, because we have estrogen receptors virtually everywhere in our bodies, from our brains to our bones to our bladders, the drop in estrogen that happens during the menopause transition affects absolutely everything. In this second part of our deep dive, we want to talk about how menopause actually affects a woman's day-to-day life. We are talking about mental health, our relationships, our risk for major diseases, and how this impacts us at work.
Let's start with mental health, because with my psychology background, this is something I am incredibly passionate about. A lot of women enter their mid-40s and suddenly feel like they are losing their minds. They might experience severe mood swings, depressive episodes, or panic attacks out of nowhere. And statistically, we know that women are 1.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety, and up to 30% experience symptoms severe enough to be classified as a depressive disorder during perimenopause.
Right. And if you go to a doctor who isn't trained in menopause care, they might just hand you an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication without ever checking your hormones. But it is physiological. Estrogen and progesterone directly affect neurotransmitters in our brain, like serotonin and dopamine. When our hormones are fluctuating wildly in what Dr. Mary Claire Haver calls the zone of chaos, our brain chemistry goes haywire right along with them.
And it is not just mood, it is actual cognitive function. Brain fog is a huge complaint. Women feel like they can't concentrate, they lose their train of thought, or they completely blank on a word they use every single day. Dr. Pauline Mackey, a leading neuroscientist, pointed out that about 10 to 11% of women experience a clinically significant decline in their ability to learn and remember words during the menopausal transition. It is so severe for some that they literally think they are developing early onset dementia.
Which is a terrifying thought. And frankly, the link between menopause and Alzheimer's disease is something that is finally getting the attention it deserves. 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients in the United States are female. For a long time, the medical community just shrugged and said, well, women live longer than men, and Alzheimer's is an old person's disease. But researchers like Dr. Lisa Mosconi are proving that Alzheimer's isn't just an old age disease. The changes in the brain actually start in midlife.
Exactly. Estrogen is highly neuroprotective. It promotes synaptic growth between neurons, reduces neuroinflammation, and maintains proper brain metabolism. When we lose that estrogen, those protective mechanisms weaken, which can accelerate the neurodegenerative processes that contribute to cognitive decline. Dr. Mosconi's research even suggests that a woman's lifetime exposure to estrogen, meaning her natural reproductive years plus any hormone replacement therapy she might take, strongly influences her risk for developing dementia later on.
It is sobering. We have to take our brain health so seriously during this window. But moving down from the brain, let's talk about something else that takes a massive hit during menopause, and that is our relationships, specifically our sexual health and intimacy.
This is the part nobody wants to talk about. We mentioned it briefly before the break, but genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM, is a massive issue. Up to 50 to 70% of postmenopausal women experience it, but only a tiny fraction are actually getting treated.
Right. Our bladder, urethra, and vaginal tissues are packed with estrogen and testosterone receptors. When those hormones drop, the tissue thins out, loses its elasticity, and loses moisture. Women experience severe vaginal dryness, burning, and pain during intercourse. It's not just a matter of needing a little extra lubricant, though lubricants and moisturizers are definitely a good first step. The actual physiology of the tissue is breaking down.
And let's be real about what that does to a relationship. If sex suddenly becomes excruciatingly painful, you are going to start avoiding it. A woman's libido might absolutely tank, not just because her testosterone levels are dropping, which they are, and testosterone is a major driver of desire, but because her brain is associating intimacy with pain.
Yes, and unfortunately, a lot of women suffer in silence out of embarrassment, or they think it is just a normal part of aging that they have to endure. Their partners might feel rejected or confused, leading to massive marital stress. In fact, Dr. Ariana Schulze Douglas, an OB/GYN, told a story where her perimenopausal irritability was so severe, she literally caught herself Googling how to poison her husband. Obviously, she was joking, but the mood swings and the intimacy issues can put a huge strain on even the most loving partnerships.
And it's a tragedy because it is so treatable. Localized vaginal estrogen is incredibly safe. It doesn't absorb systemically, meaning it doesn't carry the same risks as whole body hormone therapy, and it can completely revitalize that tissue. It also prevents recurrent urinary tract infections, which become highly common after menopause because the lack of estrogen alters the vaginal microbiome.
It really is a lifesaver. Okay, so we've talked about the brain and the pelvis. Now we have to talk about the heart and the bones. Alison, cardiovascular disease is the leading killer of women in the United States. More women die from heart disease than from breast cancer, yet it flies completely under the radar.
It absolutely does. And a huge reason for that is the false sense of security we get in our younger years. Estrogen is incredibly protective of our cardiovascular system. It protects the endothelium, which is the lining of our blood vessels. Because of this, women generally have lower rates of heart disease than men up until they hit menopause.
But once we cross that menopausal threshold and lose that protective estrogen, our risk sharply rises. By the time we are in our 60s and 70s, our rates of heart disease catch up to and even surpass men. We see sudden spikes in blood pressure. Our LDL, the bad cholesterol, goes up, and our insulin resistance increases, which can lead to type 2 diabetes.
And it is compounded by the sleep deprivation we talked about. There was a recent study showing that the combination of estrogen loss and the sleep fragmentation caused by constant hot flashes increases a woman's cardiovascular risk by an additional 35%. Your body is just constantly inflamed and stressed.
Which brings us to the belly fat. Oh, the dreaded visceral fat. I know so many women, myself included, who haven't changed a single thing about their diet or exercise routine, but suddenly their body composition completely shifts.
Yes, the classic menopausal middle. When estrogen drops, our bodies become more inflamed, and that inflammation drives fat storage deep into the abdomen, wrapping around our internal organs. A premenopausal woman might have about 8% of her body fat as visceral fat. After menopause, that jumps to 20 to 23%. And visceral fat is metabolically active. It pumps out more inflammatory cytokines, which just feeds into that cycle of heart disease and insulin resistance.
It's so frustrating. And while we are talking about structural changes, we cannot ignore our bones. Bone health is another silent crisis. We build our peak bone mass in our 20s, and then we rely on estrogen to help maintain it. When menopause hits, we go through a period of accelerated bone loss. Women can lose up to 20% of their bone density in just the first 5 to 7 years after their periods stop.
That is a staggering amount of bone to lose so quickly. It puts us at massive risk for osteoporosis. 50% of women over the age of 50 will break a bone due to osteoporosis. And a hip fracture in your 70s or 80s isn't just an inconvenience. It is often a death sentence or a permanent loss of independence. Up to 80% of women who suffer a hip fracture never return to their previous level of activity, and a quarter require long-term nursing home care.
It's terrifying. We outlive men by several years, but we spend a huge portion of those extra years in a frail state if we don't actively protect our bones, our brains, and our hearts during this transition.
Which leads us to the final major area we want to cover today: how all of this impacts us at work. Adriana, you and I are both in the middle of career transitions, and we are right in the thick of this age bracket. The average age of menopause is 51, meaning millions of women are going through this transition during the exact decade when they should be at the absolute peak of their professional careers and leadership potential.
Exactly. About 44% of women in the workforce are older than 45. We have institutional knowledge, we have experience, and we have wisdom. But instead of thriving, many women are silently drowning. Imagine trying to lead a board meeting or pitch a new client when you only slept 2 hours the night before. Your shirt is soaked in sweat from a hot flash, and your brain fog is so bad you literally cannot remember the name of the person sitting next to you.
It leads to what researchers call presenteeism. You are physically showing up to work, but you are not fully functioning because you feel so awful. Nearly 38% of women with moderate to severe hot flashes report presenteeism. And the economic toll of this is mind-blowing. Globally, menopause-related productivity losses cost an estimated $150 billion every single year. In the US alone, we lose $1.8 billion annually in lost work productivity.
And it's not just lost productivity on the day-to-day level. It is altering the trajectory of women's lives. Studies show that 1 in 4 women don't pursue promotions or leadership roles because they are struggling with their symptoms. Even worse, 1 in 10 women actually drop out of the workforce completely because of menopause. They just step away because they aren't getting the medical help or the workplace support they need.
And we have made so much progress in the workplace regarding pregnancy and maternity leave. We have lactation rooms, we have family leave policies, and we've somewhat normalized the reproductive phase of a woman's career. But menopause, it is the last great workplace taboo. A massive percentage of women say they would never feel comfortable bringing up their menopausal symptoms to their manager or HR department. They are terrified of ageism and sexism.
It's that double-edged sword. If you admit you are struggling with menopause, you are basically announcing your age in a society that already penalizes older women, and you risk being stereotyped as emotional, hormonal, or weak. So women hide it. They suffer in silence. They sneak off to the bathroom to dab cold water on their necks, or they quietly resign.
But it doesn't have to be this way. In the UK, they are actually miles ahead of us on this. They have national discussions about menopause in the workplace. Companies are implementing specific menopause policies, appointing menopause champions in the office, and making reasonable accommodations.
And those accommodations don't have to be crazy expensive or complicated. We are talking about allowing desk fans, providing access to cold drinking water, or letting women sit near a window that opens. We're talking about flexible working hours. So if a woman was up all night with night sweats, she can come in a little later, or offering breathable uniform options so women aren't trapped in heavy polyester while having a hot flash.
Just creating a culture where it is okay to say, hey, I'm having a hot flash. I need to step out of this meeting for 2 minutes without it being a career-ending admission. If we want to keep women in the workforce, earning what they deserve and contributing to the economy, employers have to start stepping up. It is an equity issue and, frankly, a retention issue.
Amen to that. When women are forced to step back or retire early, it impacts our lifetime earning potential, our social security, and our retirement savings. We already face a gender pay gap. Menopause should not be the thing that widens the retirement wealth gap even further.
So we've painted a pretty heavy picture today. We've talked about the brain fog, the anxiety, the painful sex, the visceral fat, the bone loss, and the absolute struggle it can be to maintain a career through all of it. If you are listening to this and feeling overwhelmed, take a deep breath.
Yes, please don't panic. We laid out all the bad news today so that you know exactly what is happening in your body, and so you know that you are not alone, and more importantly, you are not crazy. Everything you are experiencing is biologically rooted.
And because it is biological, it is treatable. That is the silver lining here. You do not get a prize for suffering through menopause naturally without any help. There are solutions, and the science has evolved dramatically over the last 2 decades.
Which perfectly tees up our next segment. When we come back for part 3 of this episode, we are going to pivot from the problems to the solutions. We will finally dive into the truth about hormone replacement therapy, debunk the myths that have terrified women since 2002, and look at the actual risks and incredible benefits of modern treatment.
We will also cover lifestyle strategies, non-hormonal medications, and how to advocate for yourself so you can actually thrive in this next chapter. Stay with us, you won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to Girls Gone Menopause. If you are just joining us, I'm Adreana, and I'm here with my Alison still talking about menopause.
Hey everyone, welcome to part 3, which is actually going to be the final segment of today's massive deep dive episode on all things menopause. In part 1, we talked about the underlying biology of the transition. In part 2, we talked about the heavy toll it takes on our bodies, our minds, our relationships, and our careers. We promised you solutions, and we are finally here.
Yes, we are. We are pivoting from the problems to the treatments. And ladies, there is a massive landscape to cover. We're talking about hormone therapy, the wild west of menopause supplements, energy and laser devices, testosterone, and how your diet and exercise actually fit into the picture. So, Alison, let's start with the big one. The absolute gold standard of care, hormone replacement therapy, or HRT.
or as it's more accurately called now for natural menopause, menopausal hormone therapy, or MHT. Whatever you call it, this is the treatment that has been proven to be highly effective for relieving the symptoms of the menopause transition. It simply helps to close the gap between the high and low estrogen levels in our bodies, providing relief from hot flashes, sleep disturbances, vaginal dryness, and mood changes.
But let's be totally real. When you say hormone therapy, a lot of women immediately panic. I panicked, and we have to talk about why that fear exists. In 2002, the Women's Health Initiative, or WHI study, released preliminary data that sent shockwaves through the medical community. They reported that a specific combination of estrogen and a synthetic progestin increased the risk of breast cancer, heart disease, and stroke.
I remember exactly where I was when that news broke. Millions of women dropped their hormone prescriptions into the trash, virtually overnight. But what the media didn't tell you, and what scientists have spent the last 2 decades trying to correct, is that the alarming sounding relative risk numbers were widely misinterpreted. The increased absolute risks for any individual woman taking the therapy were actually very small.
Furthermore, they heavily weighed the age groups toward women in their 60s and 70s, many of whom were starting hormones a decade or more after their menopause transition had already ended. Today, the scientific literature and major medical societies agree that for women under the age of 60, or within 10 years of menopause onset, the benefits of hormone therapy generally outweigh the risks. In fact, we are seeing major progress. Last November, the FDA even announced that it would remove its strongest black box warnings from hormone therapy products because they had scared so many women off from getting the help they desperately needed.
It is about time, and the benefits of HRT go far beyond just cooling down a hot flash. If started early in the transition, hormone therapy preserves bone density, dramatically reduces fracture risk, and even helps reduce the risk of colorectal cancer in postmenopausal people.
But, Alison, when women do decide to explore hormone therapy, they immediately run into a wall of confusing terminology online. The biggest debate on the internet right now is bioidentical versus synthetic hormones. And as someone with a background in digital marketing, I see right through how marketers weaponize these words. Let's break down the actual science.
Yes, please. In the medical literature, bioidentical refers strictly to the molecular structure of the hormone. Bioidentical hormones have the exact same chemical and molecular structure as the endogenous human hormones your body naturally produces. Synthetic hormones, on the other hand, have a chemical structure that is different from what your body produces.
Right. A perfect example of a synthetic or non-human hormone is Premarin, which is conjugated equine estrogen derived from pregnant mare urine. The equine estrogen metabolites in Premarin do not resemble what human women produce naturally. Another synthetic example is medroxyprogesterone acetate, or MPA, which was the synthetic progestin used in that infamous WHI study.
And here is where the marketing trap springs on consumers. A lot of women are told that bioidentical automatically means natural. But natural refers to the source of the hormone, not its structure. For instance, phytoestrogens found in soy are natural, but they are structurally dissimilar to human hormones. Meanwhile, the bioidentical hormone estradiol that your doctor might prescribe might originate from a plant source like wild Mexican yams, but it has to be commercially processed in a laboratory to become structurally bioidentical to human estrogen. So bioidentical hormones are not completely natural in the way marketers want you to think.
The other huge misconception is that to get bioidentical hormones, you have to go to a special compounding pharmacy and have them custom mixed for you. That is a total myth. Conventional FDA-approved hormone therapy includes both synthetic and bioidentical options. You can get FDA-approved bioidentical estradiol in the form of pills, patches, gels, sprays, and vaginal rings right at your local Walgreens or CVS. And FDA-approved bioidentical progesterone is available as a pill called Prometrium.
And why does FDA approval matter? Because FDA approval means the drug has undergone rigorous testing for safety, efficacy, purity, and potency, with standardized batch-to-batch consistency. Compounded bioidentical hormone therapy, or CBHT, is custom mixed by a pharmacist. Because CBHT is not FDA regulated, it suffers from inconsistent dosing and a lack of standardized purity.
Yes, major organizations like the North American Menopause Society and the National Academies of Sciences explicitly caution against using compounded hormones. There is absolutely no robust clinical evidence showing compounded bioidenticals are safer or more effective than FDA-approved therapies. In fact, if you go to a compounding pharmacy and get a bioidentical progesterone cream, you need to know that transdermal progesterone absorption is highly variable and unpredictable, and it is explicitly not recommended for protecting your uterine lining if you are taking estrogen.
And please, if you are listening, do not buy over-the-counter wild yam cream thinking it will act as a natural progesterone. The human body lacks the enzymes required to convert the plant's active compound, diosgenin, into progesterone. You're basically just rubbing an expensive, heavily marketed lotion on yourself.
Which brings us perfectly to our next topic. Testosterone for women. Alison, if I see one more influencer on TikTok telling women they need testosterone pellets to cure their menopause brain fog and weight gain, I am going to lose my mind.
I am right there with you. The testosterone marketing directed at women right now is intense. Online clinics and longevity med spas are pushing testosterone as a miracle cure for energy, mood, brain fog, and muscle gain. But what does the actual peer-reviewed science say?
The science is actually exceptionally clear, but highly restricted. There is exactly one evidence-based, clinically validated indication for prescribing systemic testosterone to postmenopausal women, and that is hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or HSDD. HSDD is characterized by a persistent absence of sexual desire that causes a woman profound personal distress.
Exactly. A global consensus position statement endorsed by the Endocrine Society and the Menopause Society confirmed that physiological doses of transdermal testosterone significantly improve sexual desire, arousal, and orgasm in appropriately selected postmenopausal women. But, and this is a massive but, the consensus guidelines explicitly state that current data does not support prescribing testosterone for cognitive health, cardiovascular health, energy, mood, or bone density in women.
There is no credible evidence that physiologic doses of testosterone dramatically improve your stamina or build muscle mass in women. Those kinds of effects are only seen when testosterone doses approach the male range, which leads to significant and potentially irreversible adverse side effects.
And that is the terrifying part of these unregulated clinics. Elevated levels of testosterone in women can cause irreversible voice deepening, clitoral enlargement, severe acne, male pattern baldness, and increase the risk of blood clots and liver dysfunction.
Which is why major medical societies strongly caution against the use of compounded testosterone pellets. Once a pellet is surgically inserted under your skin, it cannot be easily removed or dose adjusted. If you start experiencing irreversible side effects, like your voice dropping or losing your hair, you are stuck with those dangerously high supraphysiological hormone levels in your system until the pellet slowly dissolves over several months.
So if you genuinely suffer from HSDD and want to try testosterone, how are you supposed to do it safely? Because, shockingly, there is currently no FDA-approved testosterone formulation specifically designed for women in the United States.
Right now, clinicians are forced to prescribe FDA-approved male products like transdermal gels or creams off-label. The strict clinical objective is to restore testosterone to the normal physiological range for a premenopausal woman. To achieve this safely, women are typically instructed to use roughly 1/10 of the standard male dose. It requires continuous monitoring of your blood counts and liver function every 6 months to meet safety standards. It is a serious medical protocol, not something to casually buy from a wellness influencer.
Speaking of buying things from influencers, let's talk about the $17 billion global market of menopause dietary supplements. We are calling this exactly what it is: Meno-washing. From celebrities like Drew Barrymore to major drugstore brands, everyone is hawking a pill, a powder, or a gummy, claiming to ease hot flashes, clear brain fog, and balance your hormones.
With my background in marketing, I find the supplement data absolutely fascinating because it relies so heavily on the placebo effect. Dr. John Schifrin from Harvard points out that in menopause intervention trials, the placebo effect is notoriously powerful. Taking a sugar pill or a sham treatment can reduce hot flashes by 30 to 50%, even when measured objectively with temperature sensors on the skin. The relief women feel is real, but it's not due to the botanical ingredients they're swallowing.
And because supplements aren't regulated by the FDA for efficacy, there is no evidence that most of these products actually work. The Menopause Society released a position statement concluding that no dietary supplements or herbal remedies are considered effective for menopause relief.
Let's name names. Black cohosh is the most widely studied botanical for hot flashes. The clinical reality? Large-scale, rigorous studies frequently show no statistically significant difference between black cohosh and a placebo. Worse, the National Institutes of Health notes that there are rare but persistent reports linking black cohosh to severe liver damage.
What about phytoestrogens like the soy isoflavones found in red clover or soybeans?
That is the one category where data leans toward a measurable biological effect, but it's very modest. Soy isoflavones share a structural similarity to human estradiol and can bind weakly to our estrogen receptors. Meta-analyses show they can reduce hot flash frequency by roughly 20% compared to a placebo. But it depends heavily on your gut microbiome. Only about 20 to 30% of Western adults have the specific gut bacteria needed to convert the soy compound didzine into its more potent active metabolite, equal.
As for the fringe botanicals that constantly show up in these expensive hormone balancing blends, things like dong quai, evening primrose oil, and maca root, there is no robust, high-quality clinical evidence supporting their efficacy for menopausal symptoms. Dr. Peter Cohen, an internist from Harvard who researches supplements, calls these multi-ingredient menopause pills predatory. He pointed out that if a pill actually had the potent chemical ability to magically fix your hormones overnight, it shouldn't be sold over the counter without FDA scrutiny anyway.
Exactly. Now, moving from supplements to technology. Alison, in our last segment, we talked about the horrific symptoms of genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM, vaginal dryness, burning, painful intercourse, and recurrent UTIs. We know that localized vaginal estrogen is incredibly safe and effective for this. But there's a huge industry right now marketing energy-based devices or vaginal rejuvenation to menopausal women.
Yes, the lasers and radio frequency devices. Clinics market them as a painless, hormone-free alternative to fix vaginal atrophy. But what does the science actually say?
The science says buyer beware. In 2018, the FDA issued a stark safety communication warning against using energy-based devices for vaginal rejuvenation or treating menopause symptoms. The FDA cited serious adverse events, including vaginal burns, scarring, pain during intercourse, and recurring chronic pain. These devices have never been cleared or approved by the FDA for treating GSM.
But the clinics say the lasers stimulate collagen and remodel the tissue, right?
They do say that, but the gold standard clinical trials say otherwise. In 2021, the Journal of the American Medical Association published the Velvet trial. This was a double-blind, randomized, sham-controlled trial. They compared a fractional carbon dioxide vaginal laser against a sham or fake placebo laser treatment in postmenopausal women.
Let me guess, the placebo effect struck again?
You nailed it. After 12 months, researchers found no statistically significant difference in symptom improvement between the women who got the real laser and the women who got the fake laser. Both groups experienced similar improvements. Another recent trial, the Light trial, looked specifically at breast cancer survivors using vaginal lasers, and again found no improvements in subjective symptoms or objective vaginal biopsies compared to the sham procedure.
So women are paying thousands of dollars out of pocket for an inadequately studied, controlled thermal injury to their vagina that works no better than a fake laser. That is infuriating.
It is. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the North American Menopause Society both caution that the long-term safety and efficacy of these devices are unproven and advise against their routine clinical use outside of research settings. Topical vaginal estrogen remains the standard of care with a known long-term safety profile.
Okay, we've torn down the myths. Let's build up what actually works regarding lifestyle. Diet and nutrition. We know that menopause causes our metabolism to shift and drives fat storage to our deep visceral belly area. Does changing what we eat actually help our menopause symptoms?
Yes, but we have to be incredibly precise about how it helps. Academics warn against framing diet as a standalone cure for severe hot flashes. The clinical reality is that while nutrition can attenuate mild symptoms, it rarely eliminates severe hot flashes without concurrent medical intervention or significant weight loss.
Right. The massive Women's Health Initiative dietary modification trial showed that a low-fat, high-fruit and vegetable diet only eliminated severe vasomotor symptoms if it resulted in substantial weight loss, specifically losing 10% or more of baseline body weight. Because adipose tissue or body fat acts as a thermal insulator, losing that fat makes it easier for the body to dissipate heat, which directly improves hot flashes.
But beyond weight loss, the actual composition of your diet matters. The Mediterranean diet has robust backing from societies like the European Menopause and Andropause Society. Because menopause is a pro-inflammatory state, the high intake of polyphenols from olive oil, omega-3s from oily fish, and phytoestrogens from legumes actively counteracts the oxidative stress of estrogen depletion. Studies show high adherence to the Mediterranean diet correlates with lower psychological symptoms like mood swings and lower somatic symptoms like joint pain.
And on the flip side, we know exactly what makes symptoms worse: sugar and refined carbohydrates. Diets high in ultra-processed foods cause rapid spikes and crashes in blood glucose and insulin. That glycemic instability directly triggers surges of epinephrine and norepinephrine in the brain, which act on the hypothalamus and immediately precipitate hot flashes and night sweats.
Exactly. It's not just about eating low carb, it is about carbohydrate quality. High fiber intake from whole grains stabilizes your blood sugar and promotes a healthier gut microbiome, which, as we mentioned earlier, you absolutely need in order to metabolize protective plant estrogens.
Speaking of plant estrogens, I have to bring up a really compelling recent study called the WAVES study, the Women's Study for the Alleviation of Vasomotor Symptoms. Researchers took postmenopausal women having multiple moderate to severe hot flashes a day and put half of them on a low-fat vegan diet. But here is the kicker. They required them to eat exactly 1/2 cup or 86 grams of whole cooked soybeans every single day.
And the results were staggering, weren't they?
Mind-blowing. Over 12 weeks, moderate to severe hot flashes decreased by 84% in the intervention group. Even more incredibly, 59% of the women in the vegan soy group became completely free of moderate and severe hot flashes entirely.
That is incredible. It highlights that the combination of a plant-based diet altering the gut microbiome alongside the daily intake of whole soy isoflavones might be a highly effective non-pharmacological tool.
It really is. Okay, final topic for this segment, exercise. Let's get moving.
All right, I am going to burst a major bubble right out of the gate. Exercise does not cure hot flashes. The highest levels of evidence, including rigorous randomized controlled trials and Cochrane reviews, repeatedly show no clinically significant difference in hot flashes between women who exercise and those who remain sedentary. You cannot outrun a hot flash.
Wow, I think a lot of women are going to be surprised to hear that. We're always told to just exercise more.
Right, but while it doesn't fix the thermoregulatory dysfunction in the brain causing the sweats, exercise is absolutely clinically non-negotiable during menopause for other reasons. Where exercise proves its true clinical efficacy is in managing the severe psychological and neurological fallout of menopause.
The mood swings and the insomnia.
Yes, menopause is a window of profound vulnerability for depression and anxiety. Exercise acts as a potent, non-pharmacological antidepressant. It upregulates brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which improves neuroplasticity and mitigates the mood lability caused by fluctuating hormones. The literature also shows that regular, moderate to vigorous physical activity significantly improves how fast a woman falls asleep and her overall sleep efficiency, regardless of her night sweats.
And from a purely structural standpoint, we have to talk about lifting weights. Because the drop in estrogen drastically accelerates two silent crises: osteoporosis, which is the loss of bone mineral density, and sarcopenia, the loss of skeletal muscle mass.
This is the true imperative. Cardiovascular exercise like walking or cycling is fantastic for your heart, but it is completely insufficient to arrest bone and muscle loss. The literature is explicit to force the body to fortify the skeleton without the help of estrogen. The mechanical loading must be heavy.
We are talking about high-intensity resistance and impact training. There was a landmark study called the Lift More trial that proved that heavy supervised weightlifting is not only safe for postmenopausal women with low bone mass, but it is highly effective at increasing bone density and preventing falls.
We have to stop framing exercise as a treatment for menopause symptoms and start framing it as a mandatory structural intervention. Estrogen used to protect your cardiovascular system, your bones, and your brain. Post-menopause, mechanical loading and aerobic conditioning have to take over that job. You have to lift heavy things.
So, to summarize part 3, FDA-approved bioidentical hormone therapy is highly effective and safe for many women. Testosterone has a narrow role solely for sexual desire, and you should run far away from unregulated pellets. Supplements are largely riding the coattails of the placebo effect. Laser devices for your vagina are expensive and unproven. Eating a Mediterranean or plant-based diet with whole soybeans can radically improve your symptoms, and lifting heavy weights is non-negotiable for your bones.
That is a lot of science for one episode, but knowledge is power, and knowing what actually works and what is just expensive marketing is how you take back control of your health.
Absolutely. And with that, we are wrapping up today's episode. This is the end of our very first deep dive into the zone of chaos.
But don't worry, we have so much more to talk about. We invite all of our listeners to stay tuned to Girls Gone Menopause, because in future episodes, we are going to push the boundaries and discuss emerging therapies for treating menopause. We'll be looking at pharmacological breakthroughs like the new FDA-approved NK3 receptor antagonists like Veoza, which target the exact KNDY neurons in the brain that trigger hot flashes.
We'll also be diving into the highly experimental frontier of actually delaying or eliminating menopause altogether. We will be talking about the clinical trials using rapamycin to extend ovarian function and the controversial procedure of ovarian tissue cryopreservation.
And we won't stop there. We will also be exploring alternative therapies for treating menopause, strictly separating the hype from the reality. We'll show you why things like electroacupuncture fail to beat shams in clinical trials, but how self-administered clinical hypnosis is actually recognized as a level 1, highly effective treatment that can reduce hot flashes by over 50%.
You definitely won't want to miss those conversations. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hit subscribe, leave a review, and keep lifting those heavy weights. We'll see you next time on Girls Gone Menopause.